go shopping, and we get the kids' clothes sizes, and we do a big thing where we get a bunch of volunteers to come in, help wrap the presents, and then when the kids, then they come and get them from City Hall. We have a big event for them and have a big banquet, and then the parents get to take the presents home and put them under the trees for the kids. So when they wake up on Christmas, they have Christmas. So we do that every year, and last year we had 35 families. We're hoping to do more this year, and they're all families from here in KCK. So if you have families, somebody you can think of that's in need that could use that, to have some kids or something, please get with me, and I have some paperwork that we could fill out. And then once we do that, then officers will actually go and visit them in the home and do a vetting process, again, to make sure that they're not driving a brand new vehicle and have a brand new house and they're asking for free presents. You know, we actually go and talk to them to see if it's somebody that could use a boost up, you know, that could use a hand up. So keep that in mind, and hopefully, I don't know when the deadline is for that, but if you think of somebody, please send me a message, call me, send me an email, or call me, leave me a message, and I will get back with you and get them on the list, at least to be looked into.
Okay.
Anything else? Is that it?
Okay. Well, thank you
All
very
right.
much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for all you
All
do.
right.
Yes.
Were you getting ready to leave?
Well, maybe. If you have something for me, you can tell me.
Our speaker has some pins, and we'll give one to you.
What's that?
Oh, our speaker is Frances Robinson,
Okay.
and
Thank
those
you.
pins tell you about her, the different hobbies and things that she has.
It's my age.
Oh, okay.
And she has written 2 books she's going to talk about.
Oh, you can talk right
To
now?
persist.
I'll stick around for us a little bit. No pressure. I have high expectations. Okay, thank you.
Okay, our guest speaker, everybody knows Frances. She grew up in the neighborhood. She has 2 books out, and the latest book is about her grandfather. Take it away, Frances.
Okay, no. I'm just gonna try to do something here. Can't figure out how to do it. Okay, anyway, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Actually, when I mentioned to Rawson that I would be interested in sharing my book, I didn't realize it was gonna be quite so soon. So anyway, okay, I guess, well, I'm happy to have an opportunity to share my book that's titled Reason to Persist, and it is a biography of my grandfather, Judge Isaac Franklin Bradley Sr. Let me begin by letting you know that it was by mistake that I even actually considered writing the second book, and I'm going to go with my notes here. It was a result of having successfully published my first book titled From Stress to Blessed that I shared with you earlier this year, and that ultimately inspired me to even attempt to write a second book while I was still in the mood. It was not, however, as easy as I thought it would be, because the initial challenge that I faced when I decided to write a book about my grandfather was believing that I could fill about 1/4 of the book with some notes that I had taken and prepared for a speech that I previously gave, and then fill the other 3/4 of the book with a copy of a reproduction of a volume of works that my grandfather wrote many, many years ago, and which I thought would be a very interesting read. However, after I retyped the entire work of about over 150 pages, to my amazement, I discovered that a majority of the material that my grandfather wrote that I had planned to put in the book had already been reprinted by several different publishers. So confused about what to do next, I then reluctantly realized that there was really no need for me to simply republish another version of the same material just for the sake of adding my name to the final product. So after much deliberation, I decided that perhaps my purpose should be to create a manuscript that would include documented written evidence about the accomplishments of my grandfather that I obtained from a variety of sources, including a surprisingly large amount from the internet, and to add to that an intentionally brief, very brief description of the political culture that surrounded his life that probably influenced his determination to achieve, not as an attempt to rewrite and fill the space with an enormous volume of already well-documented historical events, as a legitimate historian might do it, but to simply instead weave the fragmented information that I gathered through research into one single narrative with a focus on capturing the achievements of my grandfather. I might add here that because he died before I was born, one of my biggest regrets is that I did not attempt to address this project earlier in my life when I could have possibly interviewed people who actually knew him personally for the purpose of including their anecdotes about him in the book. As a result, I therefore decided to deliberately avoid relying on any second-hand hearsay from people who may have only heard about him, including the stories that I only vaguely remember having heard as a child, in an effort to be as authentic as possible. So that ultimately, for the final product, I did combine all of the fragmented written information that I gathered, and I organized it into a documentary about his life that I felt was important to share with an audience of informed readers. So, who was Isaac Franklin Bradley Sr.? This is what I found. He was born in Cambridge, Missouri on September 8, 1862, during the midst of the Civil War, just 4 months before President Abraham Lincoln issued the infamous Emancipation Proclamation that was reportedly designed to abolish slavery. However, as a result of the criminal practice of slavery that flourished at the time of his birth, he never even saw of his father, who left when young Bradley was only about 2 weeks old. In a short autobiographical passage about his early years, he wrote, "I do not remember ever seeing my father for reason that very shortly after his advent, he took French leave to help settle a little matter of unpleasantness that was on at the time. Missouri was a great place, especially for hard times, some instances of which I very well remember, among them that from the time I was about 4 years old until I was 17, I never had a new hat or a new pair of shoes. In fact, was often short on old ones." Now, because Missouri was a slave state that offered very limited educational opportunities for colored or Negro children, young Bradley received less than 3 months of formal education in any 1 year, for a grand total of less than 18 months of schooling during his entire youth. He further recalled, again in his own words, "When I was 19 years old, there came to that little town a man whose clothes fitted him, and he had a manner and bearing altogether different from that I had been accustomed to, and I learned that he had been to the Lincoln Institute in Jefferson City. Up to that time, I'd always thought I would try to keep away from that town. However, seeing this man and learning of this new institution, I gathered enough courage to go there." Thus, inspired by that visitor, he discovered Reasons to Persist with a genuine thirst for knowledge. And in his determination to obtain a better education, Isaac Franklin Bradley saved his earnings and migrated from Cambridge to Jefferson City, Missouri, where he ultimately enrolled in the then segregated Lincoln Institute. As a student there, he persuaded his teachers to give him an opportunity to work and to earn credits at the same time. The result was that after 4 years of diligent study, he graduated in 1885. Now, during the summer following his graduation from Lincoln Institute, he pursued more Reasons to Persist with his passion for learning, and quickly determined that the field of law presented an excellent opportunity for a young man to succeed in the world. Thus, in the fall of that same year, when the legal barriers of racial segregation that existed in most institutions of higher learning in the slave state of Missouri excluded black students, he migrated to Lawrence, Kansas, a free state where he enrolled in the University of Kansas School of Law. As the only African American in his classes there, he endured many overt as well as covert acts of discrimination, yet still he managed to maintain a very high average of 93%, and consequently his persistence paid off, so that in June of 1887 he graduated with honors and an LLB degree to become the first African American to graduate from the University of Kansas School of Law. Shortly after graduating from KU, Isaac Franklin Bradley secured permission to practice law in the courts of Kansas, and in 1889 was elected City Justice of the Peace, Kansas City, Kansas. It was the result of being elected the first African American judge in the city that he was subsequently most frequently addressed by the title judge for the remainder of his life. In 1891, he married a young teacher named Mamie Bradley Johnson of Lawrence, Kansas. To that union, 2 children were born, a daughter named Ruth and a son, my father, named Isaac Franklin Bradley Jr. Now, after serving as City Justice of the Peace, Judge Bradley continued his public service by serving as Deputy County Attorney in 1895. And when he assumed the title of until he assumed the title of second assistant to the county attorney, and later first assistant prosecuting attorney in Wyandotte County, Kansas, a position that he held until 1899. Now, although the practice of law was his profession, Judge Bradley also took an active role in major civic as well as local political affairs in his community. He was an entrepreneur who often teamed with other visionaries to implement projects that enhanced the lives of the citizens of Kansas City, Kansas. One of his earliest business endeavors was the establishment of the American Commercial League Coal and Grain Company. Founded in the early 1890s, the ACL was a joint stock company that dealt in coal, feed, flour, and groceries. In 1898, he continued to identify more reasons to persist by helping to establish the only hospital of the African Methodist Episcopal Church known as the historic Douglas Hospital in Kansas City, Kansas. And although he was not known to be boastful about his accomplishments, Judge Bradley did enjoy a great sense of pride in the establishment of this new facility. In the turn of the century 1900 edition of the University of Kansas Law School magazine, he wrote, "The Douglas Hospital and Training School for Nurses, of which I was one of the founders and am still the president of the board of directors, is the only thing of its kind in the United States organized, managed, and maintained by Negroes alone. And I will add that it is run on the charitable plan and its doors are open to the world regardless of race, color, or condition." Judge Bradley was also an original member of the Afro-American Council, Washington, D.C. of 1898 and later served as a presidential elector for the Kansas Republican Party in 1900. I might note here that in those days, most African-American leaders were members of the Republican Party. Although during that same year, he also joined the local chapter of Masons United Brothers of Friendship, Knights of Pythias. He received one of his most distinctive honors, however, right after the turn of the century, when fierce opposition to the massive lynchings that were taking place throughout the country were coupled with the controversial rhetoric of Booker T. Washington that called for Negroes to try to do away with discrimination by simply elevating themselves through hard work and material prosperity. It was then that Judge Bradley accepted an invitation from W.E.B. Du Bois in 1905 to become a charter member of the historic Niagara movement, which of course was a forerunner of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and a model for subsequent civil rights organizations that chose to end discrimination by actively protesting against unjust treatment and demanding equal rights through political action. Shortly after that landmark event, Judge Bradley returned to Kansas with a determined focus on many more reasons to persist, and chose to implement them in his own hometown in an effort to make a difference in his local community. He soon helped to establish the commission form of government, which is currently practiced in Kansas City, Kansas today. In 1909, he helped to sponsor a drive to erect the first monument in the United States raised in memory of the noted abolitionist John Brown. The statue was placed on the campus of Western University in Old Quindaro part of Kansas City, Kansas. In 1913, he organized an activity known as the Distress Meeting, which was the forerunner of the Civic League, an organization dedicated to improving race relations in the city, and very active in promoting minority voter registration as well as minority political participation in government. Judge Bradley also helped to organize the Wyandotte Drug Company, the Kansas City, Kansas Casket and Embalming Company, and the funeral home now known as the Mrs. J.W. Jones Funeral Home. He is also credited with initiating the establishment of the Dunbar Elementary School. Now, in his persistent effort to address the many social ills of his community and those as well as those of the nation, Judge Bradley was a fierce critic of how government actually works. He addressed his concerns in a trilogy of treatises on political economy that have been described as far advanced for their time. A unifying theme that's found in all three works suggests that basic human greed is a condition that is manifested when unearned wealth is too often obtained, where there is an absence of comparable or reasonable effort. The first work, titled The Reign of Reason, was published in 1912. It is this particular work that I had originally planned to include in my book, only to discover that not only had it been reprinted in several different languages, but more than a half dozen publishers, by more than a half dozen publishers, but it can now actually be read in its entirety for free on the internet. I encourage you to check it out sometime, since I decided not to reprint it. The second work, titled The Lion and the Lamb, was published in 1921, and the third work, titled The Truth as to Social Equality, Reason and Common Sense, was published just a few years later. In 1928, he became the owner and editor of the Wyandotte Echo newspaper. Publication is still in print today. Judge Bradley died just 10 years after that on November 8, 1938, at the age of 76. Now, while my book, Reasons to Persist, is primarily about Judge Isaac Franklin Bradley Sr., I also included just a brief biography about his son, Isaac Franklin Bradley Jr., who was, like his father, found reasons to persist. After graduating from Sumner High School in 1912, he too went on to also graduate from the University of Kansas School of Law in 1917. As a veteran of 2 World Wars, I.F. Bradley Jr. joined the United States Army during World War I, attended officer training school in both Des Moines, Iowa and Camp Pike, Arkansas, and in 1918 was commissioned Second Lieutenant of Infantry. During World War II, he was commissioned captain of the first separate company of African American men in the Kansas State Guard. Attorney I.F. Bradley Jr. also engaged in a lucrative law practice. He served as special assistant to 2 attorney generals in Kansas and was registered to practice in the Kansas Supreme Court. He was appointed attorney and counselor of the United States Circuit Court of Appeals and the 10th Circuit Court, and was a longtime member of both the Wyandotte County Bar Association and the Kansas Bar Association. He helped to establish the Upsilon chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Inc. at the University of Kansas, and in 1919 became a charter member of the Beta Lambda chapter here in Kansas City. Incidentally, attorney